How are you doing? It's nice to see you again.
Oh, yeah, no.
How you doing?
Yeah, I know. Honestly, too bad it's just been like really on and off and stuff since like around the holidays. There's really not that much stuff going on, but yeah, especially on the weekends and stuff because I'm on weekend recording most of the time. Yeah, like yesterday we were just like sitting around for like felt like 3 hours just looking for something.
Yeah, a lot of questions from like.
Yeah, get it done.
Yep.
Just look after. Okay, good deal. Thank you.
I'll hit that again. We're calling the meeting to order. We had an executive session just prior to coming back to this meeting, and the purpose was for personnel and security issues. So at this time, we'll turn the meeting over to Camilla.
Thank you, Dr. Malloy. Nick is going to drive our PowerPoint over on the screen, and you also have a paper handout so you can make notes. And then, as we had in the fall, there are some exhibits that show the statewide statistics. They reference on slide 15. So if you want to see the actual entire state information, you have those exhibits in your packet as well. So next slide, Nick. Thank you. So for our budget review schedule, tonight we're going to look at transportation and contractual obligations. In February, we'll be asking for some direction regarding any areas for reductions. And we'll begin our preliminary budget discussions for 23-24 in March and April. And tonight's agenda includes the budget timeline review and referendum exceptions. Then Sue's going to go over some of the components and the history of the basic ed formula, where we receive our biggest amount of money from the state. Then we're going to go over overall costs and statewide comparisons for some of our contractual obligations, which our largest is for salaries and healthcare, and as well as our transportation contract, and then a 10-year comparison of our contractual obligations. Then we'll review where we are with ESSER supplanting versus supplement, and then a discussion. Our timeline in December, the referendum exception calculation was provided by the state, and it did verify that we were to compare 21-22 with 20-21, and we are not eligible for any referendum exceptions. Special ed has been the area that we possibly could have been eligible, but we aren't. So next Tuesday, we'll be asking the board to vote on a resolution not to exceed the index. And in February, we'll begin our department finance or budget meetings with 25 directors and principals, and we'll have another committee of the whole for finance on February 6th. Here's the slide that shows the special ed expenses over revenues. For the referendum exceptions, you have to have, a district has to have an increase from one year to the next that actually exceeds the index. And this year, our index is 5.9%, and our increase in special ed was only 1.3%. So we weren't even close to being eligible. In April, we'll begin reviewing our preliminary budget for next year. And then in May, in our committee of the whole meeting, we'll review the proposed final, and then you'll need to vote on a proposed final on May 16th. And then June, we'll need to vote on the final general fund budget, and it's due on June 30th. So that's just a review of our normal timeline.
Okay, so we have been throughout these presentations kind of doing some information with comparisons to things that happen statewide. And as Camilla indicated, the basic education funding formula, the state provides approximately 40% of our revenue annually. So it's important to understand the components of the basic ed formula. I told Mrs. Adams at the beginning of the meeting, the numbers geek in me thinks this is really exciting stuff. So you like flag down or fall asleep when you get to the point where it's not exciting to you. So the next slide, Nick, provides us with an outline of the two basic components of the basic education funding formula. So basically, we have a base funding amount that we are guaranteed. It's called a hold harmless amount. So that column that's labeled the base BEF amount is an amount that we get from the state, and it's a fixed amount guaranteed not to change on an annual basis, not to decrease on an annual basis. So you can see these are the state amounts that are allocated to all 500 school districts within the state. That number does not change very often. There was a slight change in 2017-18 to 18-19, and then it changed in 2021-22 to 22-23. The second column there is the basic education formula amount. That amount, I'm going to call it dynamic. So that amount is allocated to each school district based on the basic education funding formula. And as we go through the slides, we'll kind of explain how that's allocated to each school district throughout the state. You can see in the next column, that's the average, the weighted average per average daily membership. So per student. So that's the average attendance in each district throughout the state. So in 22-23, the state is saying that they're going to fund $523 per student before any of the weighting and the adjustments for poverty and other factors that the state uses. And then the last column just shows the increase that's happened over time. The next slide shows Sure.
Can you explain the increase over time?
Well, the increase over time, the basic education formula amount is the amount that the governor has added to the budget. So as I said, that base amount is what's guaranteed. It's a fixed number within the budget itself. That's middle column, the dynamic amount for what I'm saying is the amount that the governor adds to the budget. And you can see that large number at the very bottom, the $1.4 billion that the governor added to the budget this year. That's the amount that he advertised that was coming out of the state's rainy day fund. So that's why there's such a dramatic increase from last year to this year as the state recognizes the fiscal cliff that's coming as a result of the pandemic funding and other issues that are happening within the school districts throughout the state. Does that answer? Is that what you're looking for? Okay. And the next slide shows what Altoona's distribution of those two numbers are. So you can look at our hold harmless number in that first column has not changed much from 2016 through the present. The exception of that is if you look in the last two rows, so 21-22 and then 22-23, if you remember there was legislation throughout the state and actually legal action from many school districts throughout the state of Pennsylvania against the government, against the state legislature and how the distribution of the formula was done. And it was called Level Up. So Level Up, the first year we received Level Up funds was in 2021 through 22. We received 721,000. We are scheduled to receive 1.7 million in Level Up money in 22-23. If you can look at the hold harmless value, the Level Up money as it's distributed to us is being added to our hold harmless. So it appears, although we don't have a guarantee, it appears that we will be able to retain those Level Up funds going forward. Yes. The thing that is not guaranteed to us is the BEF allocation, that column 2, the number that I'm calling a dynamic number. We're projected to receive $6.1 million worth of funding in 22-23. Again, that huge increase is based on the governor pulling money out of what he's calling their rainy day fund. So some of the state reserves were being allocated to education in this fiscal year. So we are the beneficiaries of some of that, but those numbers are not continued to hold going forward. As I indicated, that dynamic education formula amount is based on 3 different factors. So the first factor is the student weighted average daily membership. So those are 7,000 plus students are adjusted to another number based on poverty, acute poverty, and concentrated poverty within our district. So that's what's used to adjust that. There's also a median household income index, which is the median earnings within our area compared to the state number. And then there's a local effort and a local capacity index portion that's what attributes that 1.4 million across all those school districts within the state. So the next slide shows all the numbers and how Altoona's has held going across from 2016 through the present. So if you look, our total student weighted average daily membership continues to decrease year over year. Our median household income index fluctuates, and it's based on what's happening within the state. Our local effort capacity index has decreased from 2016 through 2021-22, and it's just starting to rebound a little bit within this last fiscal year. Those first 3 columns multiplied together give you the adjusted ADM number, which is how the state apportions it. If you can see there, Altoona is continuing to decrease, although our percentage of basic ed allocation is also decreasing.
The median household index our median household income is below the state level.
Yeah, it's about, there's another slide that shows that. We're about this, the state average in this year is $63,627. Altoona area school district's at $45,019.
So when you compare those two numbers, it's put through a formula to create the weighted amount, the
Right.
multiplier.
Right. So if you go to the next slide, I think it's easier to see in words in this particular case. So our school district is seeing a decline in total student weighted average daily membership. So we've decreased about 3.47% in the last 7 years. While that is a decrease, the state has decreased at 6.8% over the same period. So that means that we are receiving a little bit higher allocation because we're decreasing at a rate slower than the state is. The next median household income index is not the same. So we've seen a 17.8% increase over 7 years, which sounds great. And we are certainly seeing growth within the Altoona Area School District, and our community is seeing growth. So I think we're seeing good things. The state overall has experienced a 20% increase. So even though we've had good increases, our increase hasn't been at the same level the state is. Therefore, we're not receiving the allocation at a high rate like some of the other things are in the state. The last one is the biggest component. So there's a variation in our local effort capacity index. So the local tax related income compared to the statewide median household income, which means the revenue per median, the local tax revenue, so real estate tax revenue compared to what our median household income is. So our tax rate compared to what our income is lower than what the state is. So the range across the state is 0.03 up to 2.07 with an average of 1.08. And if you remember from the prior slide, we're at 0.9. So that number says that we are not taxing to the ability that our households can support. So compared to other areas within the state. And that's part of the education formula, which means that 1.4 million that they're allocating across all the districts, because we're not providing the local effort that other districts are within the state, we're not receiving the proportionate share of that 1.4 million that we could be. Does that make any sense to anybody that other than my numbers geek brain?
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So can we do you compare that threshold in here to other schools locally? Is that later?
I did not provide an allocation other than the percentages of what we're receiving. So let me flip back on my notes. Altoona is 26 out of 500 in the adjusted average daily membership. So that means that we're receiving 26 out of, we're ranked that high. So according to basic education formula allocation, we're in the top 26. Yes, thank you. The top 34 districts actually receive 50% of that revenue allocation. So we are receiving a large portion of that distribution. We are not receiving we're not at a one-to-one formula, which would be the ultimate goal. So that's the comparison that I have.
And then historically, I'm not suggesting this, but as you look at school districts that have been distressed, right, been ruled distressed, do you know what those numbers rate? You know, when they come in, I've read ahead, right? They look at what your effort has been locally. Any idea?
I could research that. I do not know off the top of my head, because we do know there's a couple distressed districts that we know historically, and I can look at their records and see where their indexes have been.
The key is that with our local effort being 0.9, That means there's no error. Even though our household income index is 1.41, by whatever that whole number is, as it multiplies across, we're getting 90% of it because our local tax effort is 0.9 instead of a 1 or 1.08, which is the average across the state.
Because, you know, I've read about some of these school districts who've had these issues, and if the state would come in, they say, well, listen, you've given these increases and you've done this and that, but as a board, you haven't
Raise tax.
raised taxes.
Right.
But you're still giving out increases, and so we just have to be cognizant of that as we move forward.
The one instance that was brought up by a previous board member was Penn Hills, and Penn Hills was told by the state that they needed to raise their taxes the equivalent of 3.2 mils based on our numbers, which if we were to do that here would have been a $6 million tax increase. And that's how the state based that on their local effort and where they were with state funding, et cetera. So.
That's all I have on the basic education formula. I will say honestly, I've researched this formula for 3 or 4 years, and it's taking me this long to get this basic understanding of it. It's a very, very complex calculation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I'll do my best to research it, and I'll get you some answers on those distressed districts.
I'm curious if, after all your research too, that you think it's a reasonable and fair formula. I've read that it's questionable, right?
Bryce and I were having a discussion about that just prior to the meeting, and there are other states that allocate it more based on needs of the areas more specifically than in these allocations. I've not researched those other states either. What I can tell you, it's very complex and convoluted, and some of the numbers that I could back into the numbers and figure out where the state got them. Others seem to be an enigma, and I can't quite figure out how they arrived at the calculation.
It's probably 10 or 15 factors that go into creating the ADM and the ultimate, the ultimate number that they multiply our disbursement from the state with. Every time I feel like I have a handle on it, it just goes poof. It's just that it's a very complex generated number. So.
And when they revised the formula, I don't remember the year, 8 or 10 years ago, they started giving more weight to English language learners, districts, charter schools, which tended to favor the eastern part of the state more. And my understanding is the reason that Level Up was necessary is there were a group of schools, Altoona included, who were harmed by that revision in the formula. And when Dr. Priatel first came, he said, what would our basic ed subsidy have been if we had the old formula? And we were losing
Approximately a third of any increase.
Right. Every year, and we couldn't recoup it. So this Level Up is helping, but we've gone years and years without that funding.
And you'll hear hold harmless on occasion, and usually hold harmless comes from the schools out east. Hold harmless was put in place, I don't know if it was in 1984. It based school reimbursements on a very old number, meaning that when Altoona was pretty much at its peak, that's where hold harmless was based. So our state reimbursement was high based on our number of students, based on population number of students, et cetera. And that created that hold harmless number. If there was a push in the state, and if they were, that could cause approximately an $18 million deficit. So if anybody's talking about getting rid of hold harmless, your position should be, please, no, don't, leave it the way it is. Because while hold harmless hurts the growing districts in the eastern part of the state and the western part of the state, it's the survival of all the central PA districts. I mean, literally Cambria County, Blair County, Bedford County, Huntington, Clearfield, they're all very dependent on hold harmless to maintain numbers, to maintain budget. Because the number is based on a historical percentage of reimbursement. Now, the new funds that are coming out are not based on hold harmless, but the old funds are. Go ahead.
Are our local state legislators actively involved in understanding this? And do you feel we're being adequately represented down there? Do we need to ask? I know they have a million things going on, but this is really.
Well, Lou Schmidt was on the Appropriations Committee, and he and I had several talks about what we needed as a school district, et cetera. And last year was a very good year for state funding. I mean, we budgeted so much, we still ended up with an extra 2.8 million from the state over what we had budgeted. So, and I think some of that had to do specifically with the fact that he's fighting for our region, he's fighting for our town and our school district to make sure that we are properly funded. There was a point in time where one of our legislators was he was on a transportation committee, and he was turning down any transportation funds allotted to the city, to Altoona in particular. And when you turn down $2-3 million worth of transportation funds, maybe more, you turn that down. Well, they don't just decide they're going to give that back to the taxpayers. It was distributed to Clearfield, Huntington, Bedford, and other areas, because if Altoona didn't want it, they had people who definitely wanted it. So, I mean, it's a matter of having, and you're correct, it's a matter of having legislators who are going to fight for us to make sure that we get the appropriate share of the pie, so that we can continue to maintain our programs and our school district for the population. Budget, salary.
So our major contracts relate to salaries and benefits, and then Sue's going to go over the transportation contract. So in the fall, when we started comparing our enrollment with other districts, our total expenditures with other districts, we're continuing with that same type of comparison as it relates to salaries. So statewide, when we look at our average cost per employee, and this is all salaries, this is not just teachers, this is not just an individual group, this is all salaries. Our average cost per employee is $45,000, $45,900, which is 440 out of 496 districts. So there are 90% of the districts who have a higher average cost per employee. And all of that data is included in this Exhibit 1 that's in your packet if you want to see where other districts fall. But this seems to indicate to me, we know this area is a very affordable area. We would like to, cost of housing is reasonable, but our cost per employee is very, very low compared to the rest of the state. So we have done our best to try to negotiate fair contracts, but keeping our good stewardship with the taxpayers' dollars. Our salary expense per pupil is $69.69, and that's 387th out of 496 districts. So 78% of districts statewide have a higher per pupil salary expense than we do. And that's shown on Exhibit 2 that's in your packet. And then our salaries as a percentage of total expenditures is 43%, which is back up to the higher part of compared to the state, 59 out of 496. We invest our money in providing services and supports to the students. And I think that's what this reflects. Most of our salaries are for teachers and other support staff directly involving students.
If you look at enrollment, you look at the size of our district, I believe we're in 18, 19, or 20 on the ranking by size. And our average percentage of total expenditures is 59th, because that would be, that basically compares our total expenditures, and that's total expenditures driven by number of students. So when you look at this number, you realize, yes, we're 59th, but we should be 20th or 18th.
It also indicates that we have reduced costs in every other area as much as possible when we're compared to the rest of the state. When we've got 43% of our expenditures are for salaries, and then if you add the benefits in, I believe it was 71. Most of our costs are in direct services and supports to students in the form of salary and benefits.
Camilla, excuse me, could it also indicate we have a lot of young teachers? And
Yes, it
the
could.
other thing that tells me is a lot of districts in the state have older teachers. They're going to be retiring, and they're going to be trying to recruit our teachers. And we have the issue of retention and doing what we can to retain our staff. So we have to look at those numbers also and make sure we don't fall behind, because people go where there's more money. It's a competitive thing, especially today.
Transportation.
Transportation is one of the other large contractual obligations we have annually. Altoona currently ranks 88 out of the 497 districts in the state for expenditures in category in function code 2700. My numbers, and they're a little different than Dr. Pretel's, show that we're 32 out of 497 in student enrollment.
But isn't that based on enrolled that ride a bus?
No.
It's the total enrollment.
That's total enrollment.
So we're 32.
Yeah.
I stand corrected. I thought it was
Well,
higher.
I mean, it could be a change in years. So this is from 2021, which is the last AFR data that's available.
Okay.
And then we're 57 out of 497 in total budget expenditures. So when you're looking at transportation, there are so many variables that it's really difficult to compare ourselves to other students, students that are transported versus student enrollment. Many districts have a lot more walking schools than we have. So Penn Lincoln is really the only walking school we have in the Altoona School District. Special needs population, as you know, we are close to 25% in special needs population. A lot of those students struggle to ride full-size 72 passenger buses. So we have a lot of van transportation that we do here. The number of vehicles we have, about 110 vehicles that run in the district on a daily basis and cover 60 square miles. Other districts within the state have huge variation in those numbers. But if you look at the next slide, it will compare. The first slide shows other districts within the state that have similar budgets than ours. I ranked this based on reimbursement because I think reimbursement is an important component. So we receive about 50% reimbursement of our transportation expense. So we average $3.8 million annually in transportation expenditures. We get about 50% of that back from the state. Although that number is not at what they call state formula, it is respectable compared to some of the other districts in the state. The transportation team is actively working on getting that reimbursement rate up by maximizing the efficiency of all of our bus routes, putting as many students on a vehicle as we can for the safety of the kids, and doing other things as far as using the newer vehicles on longer runs, those kind of things to maximize reimbursement. The next slide shows Altoona as a comparison of other districts within the state that have similar expenditures. You can see we have the highest, almost the highest student population of those groups that have transportation expenditures between $3.5 and $4 million. Again, our reimbursement percentage is respectable within that peer group. The two other districts that are right around us, just below us, Western, Wayne, and Pencrest, have really good reimbursement percentages. That's a goal for us, is to increase our reimbursement percentage. The next slide does show a projected increase based on the transportation contract that the board authorized just recently. But again, over the last 12 years that this graph represents, we've only seen a 9.5% increase in transportation costs. So we're doing our best to keep those at a minimum.
So we have other contracted expenses or mandated expenses. The career and tech tuition is close to $3 million a year. Outside cyber tuition, the state just cannot seem to get any kind of legislation passed to revise the formula that they use for the reimbursement. So that's a mandated formula and cost that we have to pay. Outside placements can be up to 1.1 million. We have done our best to try to pull students back into in-house programs, and this year we are being very successful with setting up additional classrooms, and thank you for allowing us to hire some of the additional special ed staff that were necessary in creating some of these classrooms to give our kids a better education in-house whenever possible. Our insurance is very necessary, and it has stayed relatively steady at just under $400,000 over the years. Sue negotiated, and we put out for RFP the trash contract, and we saved a lot of money, and it will be up again for RFP in a couple of years. Grass cutting, we bid that out too and kept costs down there, reduced costs with that, and received better service. Technology maintenance, the more one-to-one devices we add and software, it's at a high cost, but Bryce does a phenomenal job negotiating longer year contracts, scheduling them and off years, so it helps smooth the budgetary impact to it. And we've looked into every way possible to keep those down. And then our debt service is down. Thank you for allowing us to refund two of our bond issuances, and we saved $8 million over. So our current debt service is $7 million a year. Our ESSER supplement versus supplant. Some of these slides you've seen before. We've pulled them out of previous presentations because the information is really important, and there are some of them that we think we need to just revisit. Our ESSER revenue in 21-22 was 10.3 million, and we had supplemental programs and projects that were 2.1. Summer school, we had massive summer offerings at no cost to the students. District students, other district students did have to pay tuition, and additional learning supports were 1.5. Planetarium and Juniata windows were 151,000 of that, and then our internal cyber that was supplemental, that was at a much larger number of students last year, post-pandemic, that covered about 500,000 of that. That were supplemental. The supplanted are 8.1. We've got instructional salaries for elective teachers in elective subjects in the secondary grades. at 4.9. We're covering our CTC costs out of ESSER, and our internal cyber that will be maintained and is what we believe will be the normal level is at just over $500,000. So we've got a recap of the various mandated and contractual expenses. PCERS, you've seen this slide before, retirement expenses over our revenues. The gap continues to widen and is a $6 million deficit in 2021 between what our costs were and what we were reimbursed. Cyber charter tuition costs continue to rise, even with our own program, and we're doing our best to reach out as soon as, we've talked about this before, as soon as we receive notification that someone is enrolled in a cyber school, I contact Brad and Jeff, and they reach out, and they've recruited a couple of our students back into our district away from the others. Our hospitalization costs have been relatively steady. We're doing our best to contain those costs, and we've talked about this at several meetings. Post-pandemic, there were issues that people either were not able to address during the pandemic or that were brewing during the pandemic, and we're seeing the effects of that. Regarding our salaries, over 10 years, we've only had a 17% increase in the salaries. And if we had had the 3% increases every year, rather than the total in 21-22 being 52 million, it would have been 59.7. This is through attrition. It's through restructuring some of our programs and our salaries. The big drop in 2021 reflects we laid off SEAs for a month period during 2021, and many of them did not return. We've had a struggle getting our numbers up for SEAs and then keeping them. We also eliminated a program of family consumer science, a child care development program in the high school. We also, in 2021, the board approved the retirement incentive. So we had additional attritional savings there. In addition to when Patty Burlingame retired, we didn't replace her position. So all of those factored into that savings and that drop actually in 2021.
Could I revisit, go a couple steps back? At a meeting last year, we agreed to hire that principal for the cyber school. Do we have any idea? Have we seen an decrease in enrollment? Do we know how it compares this year versus last year? I mean, that was one of the reasons I voted for it, was hoping to stem the tide and keep kids.
To another location, to an outside service provider, could cost us anywhere between $12,000 and $60,000, depending on transportation. So we've reaped the benefits of that, not only the impact it's had on those students in terms of keeping them in the school district, but also giving them an opportunity to achieve and succeed and earn their way back. Our cyber enrollment still remains high in our internal cyber, but each one of those kids, which is now over 400, represents a savings to the district of anywhere between $11,000 and $25,000, depending on if they would go to an outside cyber school. Mr. Geyer is doing a fantastic job, as Ms. Hoyt alluded to. Anytime we get notification of an enrollment of a student in an outside cyber school,
both he and I are tag teaming those students and families to try to bring them back. First of all, recognizing that we feel like we can provide a better service to them here, whether it be in our cyber or in one of our own programs. But we've doubled the program, the PAWS program, the special ed program, that is also down at Stevens as well. So that that population doubled, and we'll continue to work with those students. Once again, each of those kids represents a potential savings of anywhere between 10 and 60,000, and those kids are being successful, which is a benefit because we can in-house it. We're utilizing our own staff members. We have partnerships with outside agencies that are providing supports, and the things that those kids need to help them be successful. Building community partnerships, both the Success Program and our AADY program are working very actively in the community with giving kids opportunities with community service and other community-based projects. So I would say that it's been a resounding success at this point. There is kind of a limit as to the number of kids that we can put down there with really one deep in terms of faculty and staff in each content area. But the success of that program is really attributed to the staff that has made it work. We have phenomenal teachers that are down there, the guidance counselor and principal that the board graciously agreed to put in that location have paid dividends above and beyond what we could have expected. So thank you very much.
So thank you, because that was a leap of faith, right? I viewed it as an investment, right? And there would be a return, and the early results seem to be that there's a good return, so.
While we still have approximately 300 kids in outside cyber, we have 400 some kids in our own cyber, which is being administered by Jeff. And the other thing is the increase in the Success Program and as an alternative to our AEDY program, that is saving us a lot of, it's helping us with dropouts. It's also helping us with outside placements and not having to send kids elsewhere for extremely high tickets. And then when you look at the whole program in total that he's overseeing, it represents an economic business savings to the district significantly.
Our internal cyber cost per students, and it's not an exact amount, but is roughly 1/5, it's 20% of what we would pay to an outside cyber school minimum to educate that kid. So we're spending approximately $200 to $2,200 per kid when you prorate it over the total amount with the amount that we're spending. I know it said internal cyber, total allocation was about 1.1, 1.2 last year for well over 500 students involved in our internal cyber program. So once again, these are kids that we are not paying. It's savings on the end that we're not paying for them to go to an outside program. But it's also, we feel like educationally, they're benefiting from the quality of the programming that we are offering. They can everything. They can play our sports, be involved in our dances, participate in anything else that any other kid would be eligible for. We provide them with guidance counselors, counseling services, mental health if needed, drug and alcohol, whatever their needs are, we can provide that internally and we don't have to pay for it. I mean, if they're providing a student with a special service and an outside cyber, they are then passing that cost on to us as a district. Yeah, absolutely. They get an Alton Area High School diploma, and every student that is matriculated through our cyber program, attributed to our administration that's been involved in fostering that, every student that has made it through their senior year has graduated. We have a 100% graduation rate with students who matriculated through our cyber program to see it through to graduation.
And that's a sharp comparison to the fact that outside cybers are averaging about 45 to 50% graduation rate, and we have a 100% graduation rate. And that's strictly because of the fact that we're directly involved in ensuring that those children do not get behind and have the assistance and the support they need to be able to be completers and graduate.
Do our students participate in all the state assessments?
They do. We just gave the winter keystones. We had over 200 of our cyber students from the high school came in to take the Keystone Algebra 1 biology.
For an outside cyber, same rules?
Also, it's interesting. So we've actually witnessed what outside cybers do. They actually rent hotel space in other areas where they will go to an area And then within that region, all students, let's say PA Cyber, will host it at the convention center, and their kids have to go to the convention center to be able to take that assessment. But I would like you to go look at their results on their PSSA and their Keystone exams. They're nowhere near the performance that our kids do.
It's what our legislators need to do.
Agreed.
Well, it's just funny that if they really think the cyber is the best way to go, why are they renting hotel space and convention center space to do it face to face?
So if we compare our expenditures from 11-12 to 2021, from 10 years ago, these major categories make up 30 million of the $34 million difference in expenditures. Salaries are $5.8 million different now, higher than they were 10 years ago. But retirement is the largest driver. 10 years ago, our retirement expense was 3.8 million. Now it's at 17.2. That's the bulk of the almost half of the 30 million difference. Our hospitalization, dental, life, vision, it's all our benefits have only gone up $2 million from 10 years ago. Cyber, CTC, and transportation, it makes sense. They've gone up. They're $5 million higher than they were 10 years ago. Our debt service is $3 million higher than it was 10 years ago. So the total cost of our contractual obligations and mandates is 30 million, and our total expenditures have changed from 10 years ago. It increased from 11-12 to 2021, 34.7. Most all of those are in these contractual or mandated areas. And the $4 million difference that's left in there would include utilities, repair and maintenance. We do have a lot of buildings. Technology, now that we've increased one-to-one devices, I think Bryce had said we may have 11,000 devices in the district now. The majority were in these 5 areas, and we monitor it and try to get the best prices on our contracts. We did want to put this out for your consideration. We could have an opportunity to pursue other revenue sources. If we would propose to hire a grant writer who could seek out local, state, and federal opportunities that would support our current and our planned AASD programs, not just finding money to find money. Right. Help support our current programs or things that programs that we want to expand. Security, there's all kinds of opportunities out there. The position would also assist in monitoring and accounting for grant funds as well as other business operations projects. That's just for your consideration, but that would be our recommendation. And then in summary of tonight, our low overall average cost per employee indicates that we're providing services at one of the lowest costs in the state, being 440 out of 496. Our low salary cost per pupil also indicates we're maximizing our services at the lowest costs. Our mandated cyber charter costs and retirement are beyond our control, and they continue to rise. But we are trying to mitigate that cyber charter cost with our internal cyber to try to mitigate that. Transportation costs have been minimized, and Sue and Aaron and Dr. Priatel are reviewing it. It's ongoing. Always looking for ways to maximize the costs. If we consider hiring a grant writer to pursue other revenue sources, and just to wrap it up, is there any other area, Val, you had asked about about the statewide, just the distressed districts and where they were. Are there any other areas that you would like more information for us to research for you?
You know, I'd like to say, with the grant writer, you get someone in there who has a passion and knows what they're doing, which I've seen in the past do more than pay for themselves. That position.
I think, we're here to say, how's it gonna look for taxes? Are we gonna have to raise taxes or not? So you go look at your money that we received from the basic ed formula, the basic ed, the extra money we got. Are we gonna get that next year? Are we gonna have a level up next year? So what are we gonna be looking at? If we don't get the funding that they took out of the rainy day fund next year, we're gonna be in trouble. That's a lot of money. That was how many mills that they saved us. And the level up money was more money that we saved. And is that gonna be a guarantee, or how are we gonna look? I mean, we just have to, this is all nice, and it's how we stand, that's wonderful. But the reality is, can we run this district with the same millage we have right now, or do we have to increase? There's so many variables that we don't know.
There are, and as we move forward into the spring, Governor Shapiro is new. We have not, I haven't heard anything about what his proposal will be. Usually the governor does their budget address in February. So we'll have an idea in February what he's proposing. Last year, Governor Wolf proposed, you may remember, our portion of the increase that he was proposing would have been $7 million, would have covered our deficit. That's not what ultimately passed. But level up, they have said all along, is not, originally I thought they said it was going to be for 10 years. And now I think they've backed it off to 3 or 2.
Maybe it's not even gonna be. There's
Well-
so many things we don't know what we're going to be getting. We may pass a preliminary budget, but we don't know what the state's gonna give us. Fed money is normal, that's in and out, so that doesn't really matter. But I think the concern is, can we run the district on the amount of money, the millage we have right now? And I don't know, what happens when we run out of the COVID funds?
Yeah, that's the big concern.
Well, and
That's
those
the fiscal
discussions, as we move forward, we've been reviewing what was on the state's website for 2021, so we could compare AFR data with other districts. 21-22 is not posted on the state website yet. We're going to have to move in the spring to just looking at where Altoona stands, not so much compared to other districts, but where did we end up last year? How much of those expenditures are COVID-related expenditures or ESSER-related expenditures, and what is our true operational budget?
And that's what we're gonna have to see. And I'll tell you, in the way that we're going, I don't know if this district can cut anymore. Where are you gonna cut at? I don't have the slightest idea.
The reality is, as you can tell from where we fall versus everyone else in the state, we're about as lean and mean as would be realistic. Cuts would be programmatic in nature, because your savings comes from personnel. But at the same time, we start cutting people, we start ending up with other issues, because we are reasonably lean. I mean, I made the example at the state of the district cow in December, when I made a comparison. A local school district which has 730 kids in their junior high has 3 principals. We have 1,700 kids in our junior high, and we have 4. Well, when you're talking about behaviors, et cetera, in our large student special ed population, 4 principals versus 3, 4 principals for 1,700 kids, 3 principals for 700 kids, you realize that we could easily have 2 more principals in the junior high and still be dealing with the fact that we'd be outgunned and out undermanned. The reality is, I think I constantly get them to give me what they think the hard deficit is. And right now, the hard deficit, we think is sitting around 5 million. We're hoping it's less than that, but that's where we think it's about. I do know that Shapiro and other people involved has said to us that we can expect level up funding, which is an increase to our basic education funding. And anything that increases BEF does not go away. That's a permanent increase. So the increase we received last year should continue. But likewise, we can expect level up funding this year, but without any form of tax increase to go along with that level up funding, we're probably looking at a deficit that is still going to be significant. It'll be masked by the COVID monies,
But that's gonna catch you.
but that's going to catch us in the long run, yes.
Right, so it's just, I don't know, this is a good picture, but this isn't telling us what's gonna happen, and I don't think anyone here knows what's gonna happen.
The question I have, and the pages this far back, the ESSER supplement versus supplant. Basically, that tells us that we're supplanting funds at the tune of 8.1 million. That's the number I see that we're fighting against. Because when the ESSER fund goes away, how much of that 8.1 million have we made up through state and local revenues? It means you're taking ESSER monies and paying those salaries, vocational programs, and internal cyber. So they're still going to be here when the ESSER monies go away.
I think some of the salaries are inflated with the pension.
Well, that wasn't added to their total salary. That was a bonus.
The numbers you're giving us are from last year. Now understand, we did receive an additional 2.8 million from the state, which is the reason we're thinking that the deficit is around 5 million. We also rolled 946 or $950,000 into fund balance. And that was created by COVID funding. So we are sitting at, we feel comfortable in saying we're sitting at approximately a $5 million deficit. If we receive a significant increase from the state and we raise taxes, we could make that deficit, we could probably take the deficit down to the point where it'd be about 2.5 million, which would be reasonable considering our fund balance for the next 10 years.
And is it safe to say that every school district in the state is playing this balancing or high wire act, trying to wait out when the retirement doesn't kill your budget? And that's 2035. I'm still in the 1900s.
Right.
2035. So we have to find some way of living within our means for quite a few more years. And when the retirement deficit or whatever it is, burden goes away, it's going to make it easier to balance a budget. And the special ed costs have always been out of control because the federal mandates said originally they would fund it at 35%, if I recall, but it's never been more than 15 to 18%. So the feds have never come through, but yet the mandates never got lessened, they became greater. So there's a whole lot of things school districts are dealing with. I think it's going to require a combination of federal, state, and local funds to make this happen. And we have to do our part, and the state has to do theirs. And I guess it's just a high wire act. You never know whether you'll fall off or not. Neither do I. Okay, any other thing else? Okay, then meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Good.